Didier Reynders, European Justice Commissioner. Thank you for accepting this interview with Malta today. I'll start with the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia. Malta has passed through a lot since Daphne was murdered in 2017. In your meeting with the Prime Minister told you that Malta has learned its lessons and enacted several reforms over the past few years. Are you satisfied with what has been achieved so far?
First of all, we need to continue the investigations and we need to go further in the prosecution of all the perpetrators of the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia, because it's important to go to the end of the process, and I insist on this, and we insist on this since the beginning of the discussions with the Maltese authorities on the murder, the assassination, because we are not at the end. It's not because you have the physical perpetrator that you have all the people involved in such a kind of assassination before the court. And so that's the first element. So I insist on the fact that it's very important to continue the investigations and the prosecutions. Then on the reform, of course, there were some reforms, and certainly in the justice system, because I've discussed that since the beginning of 2020, with the different ministers of justice in Malta. But we have said in our report last year that it's important to continue to work on reforms, and more than that, to implement correctly the reforms. Again, in the fight against corruption, we need to see real final decisions on different important cases. For the moment, we are knowing that there are maybe some investigations, but without so many information. So it's a work in progress, but there are till now a lot of things to do in the parliament to pass some laws, but also in the different administrations and bodies to implement correctly the reforms.
You mentioned the recommendations from the rule of law assessment of last year. And in fact, you bring me to one of the points I have here. One of the recommendations was the need for investigations of high-level corruption, basically to establish a robust, and I quote here, track record of final judgments. Is this a problem of resources and antiquated procedures, or is it a question of willingness?
Both, I will say. So it's needed to continue to invest in the justice system, in the police system, in the Attorney General office, to be able to organize a process with enough human resource, enough financial resource, enough digital tools to increase the different possibilities to organize investigations. But it's also very important to have a real willingness to do that, and first of all, to continue to work with some European bodies. I'm thinking about Europol. You know that about the assassination of Daphne Caruana Galizia, it was very useful to work with Europol, and it's very important to continue to work with such a kind of agency. Like, it's very important to have a good cooperation with the European Public Prosecutor Office, the new office with the Chief Prosecutor Laura Kövesi. And for that, I've said I need to have a real support from the government and from the different people in the judiciary to be sure that we will have a good cooperation. But at the end, what we ask in the recommendation is not only to start investigations, but to go to a final judgment. So not to close the investigations very early or to continue doing many years. We need a real final decision in some cases. And maybe, again, with a good cooperation between the Maltese authorities and the European agencies or bodies. And that's the real problem that we have seen in Malta, the fact that we don't have a real track record or final decision. Not to say that we need condemnations, we need a final decision in justice with an open debate at the end of the investigations. And for that, it's very important to continue to work on some reforms, but also to organize a real action at the level of the different authorities.
You spoke about EPO, and you raised this in your meeting with the Parliamentary Committee for European Affairs yesterday. The question wasn't really just based on Malta, because there are different justice systems, such as in Malta, where you have investigations carried out by inquiring magistrates, where the information is not made available until that inquiry closes. What do you think should happen at a European level to make EPO a more effective institution?
But we are for the moment in an evaluation process about the implementation of the EU regulation concerning the EPPO in all the member states. But also we are looking if it's needed to adapt the regulation, to ask for some modifications of national laws. And you mentioned the situation here, like in other member states, with investigative judges. Of course, there we have a problem if there's no real cooperation from the beginning of the investigation with the EPPO. Why? In many cases, you have a lot of EU money. And you know that with the European Public Prosecutor Office, the goal was to protect the EU money from misuse or abuses in the member states. And so, of course, we will see if it's needed to adapt our regulation at the EU level, to change some legislation at the national level. But at the end, again, the most important element is a real willingness from all the actors to work together and not to say we are doing the job by ourselves, without a real cooperation with the European agencies or bodies like the EPPO, and I said also Europol. Because we are very open to take part in the process, and I'm sure that is the best way to explain that there's a real intention to go to the end of the investigations. And you know, the fight against high-level cases of corruption is an important part of the job that we have to do here, because you remember that Daphne Caruana Galizia was an investigative journalist, and she was dedicated to different important corruption cases in the country.
In January 2021, you told the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe that, and I quote, "Respect for the rule of law cannot be taken for granted, even within the Union." Close quote. And yet, many in Malta feel that the EU has acted with two weights and two measures. Tough on a small country like Malta, more lenient on much larger states, such as Hungary and Poland, despite having major issues of rule of law. How do you respond to this criticism of the EU institutions being unfair?
No, you need to look to the facts and figures. For the moment, we have a huge discussion with Poland about important judicial reforms, and without that, there is a lack of payment about the recovery and resilience plan in Poland, but there's also a fine decided by the European Court of Justice on the request of the Commission for more than 1 year. It was a fine of €1 million per day. Due to some reforms, now is reduced to €500,000 per day, but it's still there. So we are acting more in such a large country like Poland than maybe in Malta with other tools like the financial tools. And with Hungary, it's not only a discussion about the recovery and resilience plan that we have blocked till very important judicial reforms and reforms about the fight against corruption, but we have started also the process with the conditionality mechanism. So we have also suspended some funding coming from the EU level and with the agreement of the Council. And for the conditionality, it's more than €6 billion that are blocked for Hungary. So you mentioned Hungary and Poland. We are using maybe other tools, more efficient with a financial consequence in Hungary and Poland. Now in Malta, what we have said after the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia is that it was very important to start the process of reforms. And we have seen some reforms. But you know, it's not enough to pass some laws. There are, again, some laws to pass into Parliament. But after that, the most important element is the implementation, the enforcement of the different reforms. And to organize a correct enforcement, again, the best solution is to work in close cooperation with European agencies and European bodies. But we don't have double standards. We are using exactly the same methodology with all the member states. Is the reason why we publish now, you know, that every year a rule of law report on the 27th. If it's enough with a dialogue to make progress, it's fine. If it's not, we are going to the Court of Justice with infringement proceedings. You know that we are going to the court against Malta about the citizenship investment schemes.
In fact, that is something I want to
But
raise.
we are doing the same with all the member states, and sometimes we are doing more, like we are doing with Poland and Hungary. There we have huge discussion with financial pressure on the two countries.
Malta's citizenship program, the Golden Passport program. Malta has been in the crosshairs of the Commission now since the inception of this program in 2014, 2015. There is the pending case in front of the European Court of Justice. But there is an argument being made by the Maltese government that, listen, citizenship is a member state's domain. What is wrong about such a program?
First of all, what is very difficult to understand that it's a budgetary discussion. It's very difficult to say that we are given the European citizenship, not only the national consequence of such a decision, but also the European citizenship, just to have money in the budget. That's the first element. It's a question of values. And of course, it's a shared value of all the member states to organize the European citizenship. And you know that if you are given a golden passport, to be very concrete, of course you are given a European citizenship and you are given the possibility to work and to travel and to visit all the different member states and to take part in such a kind of citizenship at the EU level. And so what we have said from the beginning, we need to stop that. We need to stop such an idea to sell the European values and the European citizenship. And it was possible with dialogue to stop the process in Bulgaria. It was possible to suspend all the rules in Cyprus. I will go there again next week. But in Malta, we have had such a dialogue, and at the end, the discussion was, no, we need to do that for budgetary reasons. Okay, so if it's impossible to solve that with a dialogue, we have decided to go to the court. Of course, now we will wait the decision of the court, but I want to insist on the fact that it will be a binding decision. So we'll follow the decision. But if the decision is to stop, of course, it'd be important for Malta to stop the process.
I know this is not your remit strictly. The European Parliament recently held a discussion on a resolution condemning Greece because of a scandal involving spying on the opposition leader. However, when this debate came to the Parliament, the major parties decided to stop the resolution in its tracks, citing that it could be interpreted as interfering in upcoming elections in Spain and Greece. Do you feel when something like this happens, people out there don't really make much distinctions between Parliament, Commission, Council? It's the EU. So when Parliament takes such a decision to postpone, is it more a question of political interests coming into the way?
Of course,
there was no higher belief in the rule of law here. It was the two major blocs looking after their own skin.
No, there are, it's true, many political discussions in the European Parliament. But what is very important, there is a specific committee charge of an inquiry about such a kind of situation and use of spyware in different member states, Pegasus in some, Predator in Greece. And we are waiting for the report of the committee. And you know that such a committee has organized visits to all those concerned member states, also Spain and Greece. So we'll see. At the end, I've seen the first comments from the rapporteur, Sophie Netveld, that it was very strong about the use of spyware in the member state. That's the role of the Parliament. And we'll see at the end the conclusion of the committee. On our side, we have started, since some time now, a mapping of the situation. So we have sent a letter to all the member states, all, to know what are the possible use of different kind of special techniques like spyware from the different point of views. I'm thinking about intelligence services, law enforcement authorities, and we try to see what are the rules, because in fact it's possible to do that, of course, for security reasons, but for national security reasons, but it must be in line with some principles, the necessity to do that, the proportionality. And so we try to analyze that, and of course at the end we'll see if it's needed to come with some actions at the EU level, maybe a legislation, a proposal for legislation if it's needed. But so, to be very concrete, there were discussions on the resolution, but you will see a report of the Parliament on the use of spyware in different member states, but we will come also from the Commission point of view with our own analysis, because we have organized a mapping of all the possible use by the different services in the different member states. Because we have had such a kind of discussion with our colleague from the US, to give an example. But in the US, national security is an issue, a topic at the federal level for the entire country. We are not a federal state, we are a union.
We have 27
we have
member
27 member states with their own vision on national security. But we try to say, also in that, you need to have full respect for some principles. And there are some rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, to be very concrete, about such a kind of situation.
I'll press one more point. The Qatargate scandal. Do you think that has damaged the EU institutions?
I have a mixed feeling about that. Of course, it's a damage for all the institutions, because to see such a kind of behavior, it's a pity for all, because it's not with a huge difference in the public opinion between the different institutions. But I said a mixed feeling because it's also a good proof that it's possible for an independent justice system to go very high in the investigations and also in the European Parliament. So it's the reason why in many member states we ask to have such a track record about final decisions concerning high-level cases of corruption or other kind of criminal offenses. What is very important for the public opinion is to know that we have independent justice system in many member states, and due to that it's possible to organize investigations, prosecutions, and of course one day a trial and a final decision with condemnation or not, because there are some rights for the defense to go also to a fair trial. And so that's very important. Of course, it's a very negative image for all the institutions to see such a kind of behavior. But again, you need to see that if you have information about that, it's due to the fact that we have had some law enforcement authorities able to organize investigations and now prosecution.
In your meetings in Malta, you remarked and raised concern on the low level of seizures of Russian money in Malta. It's part of the sanctions imposed since the invasion of Ukraine. What have you been told by the government?
But first of all, I want to say that I've expressed my satisfaction about the support given by Malta to Ukraine, because that's the first point. Of course, when we have had to take many decisions to support Ukraine, to give a military support, a financial support, to receive many refugees, and I don't want to comment on all, we have had all the time a very clear support from Malta. That's the first point. The second point, we are working also together about the war crimes and all the different kind of crimes committed in Ukraine, and it's very important also to have the support of Malta, certainly in the Security Council in the United Nations, to go further with that. And now we are working on the crime of aggression, and that's also important for Malta to take part in such a process. But it's true that we have a specific situation. I'm in charge of the Freeze and Seize Task Force. So you know that we have a list of individuals, oligarchs and entities, a list of individuals and entities receiving a sanction. So we need to freeze the assets of those individuals and entities. And if you look to the 27, it was possible for the moment to freeze more than 24 billion euros. In some member states, it's billions of euros. But I've seen that in Greece and in Malta, it's only just more than 200,000 euros. So I've said very clearly how it's possible to explain that after many different kind of processes to give the citizenship to investment schemes or the residence to investment schemes to Russian people, after the beginning of the war, you have suspended the application for Russian citizens, but you don't have so many assets in the country. And so I have asked to receive explanation about that. There are maybe good explanations, but we need to be sure that there are concrete actions to try or to freeze assets in Malta, or to help other member states to freeze assets coming maybe from Russian citizens with a link with Malta. I'm thinking about yachts in other jurisdictions. And that's very important. I repeat that to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of Justice.
Have you been given an explanation?
A beginning of explanation with some details, but I have said now we need to have facts and figures very concretely. Because just to give an example, how it's possible to explain that we have had in the past some kind of investment schemes to go to the citizenship with maybe an investment in Malta and no real estate or no bank account in Malta. And so, to be very concrete, I've said that in many member states, and in different cases I've seen an increasing after that of the figures. So maybe there are some problem of reporting, maybe it's needed to take new decisions about some case, but what we ask is to have a concrete explanation. So I'm not saying that it's wrong or not, but that needs to be possible to explain the situation, because it's so low that it's abnormal. I've said the same in Greece in a recent visit, and I received the same reactions. We will provide more and more details about the reason why there are so few assets from Russian oligarchs or entities in Greece. I asked the same to Malta, and I'm hoping that what we have received as a first explanation in the 2 days, we will have on paper in the next days.
I'm expecting this to be one of the issues that you'll flag in the rule of law report.
Not only the rule of law report, certainly we are working with a task force, I said, and there we'll continue to manage the situation, because I'm sure that it must be possible to detect more than what we have for the moment.
One final issue I'd like to raise, anti-SLAPP legislation. Now, the Commission has put forward this proposal. However, the latest has been a bit watered down by the individual member states as well in terms of what the journalists and media freedom organizations would like to achieve. Do you believe that the EU can deliver an EU-wide anti-SLAPP legislation that is robust and effective?
Yes, I hope so, but you said robust, effective, but also balanced, I will say. And you spoke about the reaction of some member states. You know that we need to have a balanced approach between a real anti-SLAPP regulation to block different kind of procedure when there is nothing in the procedure. But it must be also possible to go to justice for defamation. So we need a balanced situation. You know that sometimes there are also some prejudice for individuals due to some paper in the press or some declarations in the press. So we need to have a balanced approach. But it was very clear, we want to stop such a kind of situation where there are so many procedures against one journalist or a group of journalists to block their investigative activities. And that's the real goal. So we want to have a robust and effective regulation, of course with a balanced approach, because it must be possible to go with a real issue in justice concerning defamation. And I'm quite sure that we will have the support at the end of the member state and certainly of the parliament about that. But you know that we have some months in front of us to continue to work on legislative fight.
Definitely. The Prime Minister has said he wants Malta to be one of the first countries to adopt anti-SLAPP legislation. Will you be looking at that when it happens?
Of course, but I have seen that the Prime Minister was speaking about 5 different proposals concerning the media. And he said we want to come with those bills. Of course, we'll be very pleased to see the laws at the end of the process and to see if it's possible to have a good inspiration from those laws. But for the moment, it's just a set of draft laws, so it's not really in application. So we'll see. But of course, if it's possible to have a real robust and effective anti-SLAPP legislation in Malta, why not?